Well, I've been at it. I've been speaking publicly for about 20 years now. I've been involved in the phenomenon for, well, since 1964. But I've been speaking out openly and publicly since 1991. And I consider this to be the greatest story in human history, and that's why it's got to be told. And it hasn't been told, and I'm fed up with the government lying to its people. And, you know, what time I have left, I'm going to rock the boat and rattle the cage a little bit and try to get people to wake up. Try to get people to wake up and realize that the world that they think they're living in is not at all the world that they've got.
Exactly. So for the people who are just now tuning in, we're talking with Bob Dean. I have his bio linked into the chat room, but if you don't know where the chat room is, or if you aren't into the chat room, go ahead, Bob, and tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you to start speaking the truth about the government secrecy and conspiracy.
Oh, my. You know, you asked me to, you know, I always have a problem when I start talking about this because I never know quite where to begin. And people will say, well, begin at the beginning, damn it, begin at the beginning. And I think, no, I can't do that. If I begin at the beginning, we'll be here till next week. All I can tell you is that I spent 27 years on active duty in the Army. I worked an additional 14 years with FEMA. So I got a 41-year service record in government service. Most of those years I had above top secret clearance, and I had access to and knowledge of incredible information that when I first found out about some of this, it really stunned me. I was shocked myself when I realized that the reality that we live in this world is certainly a hell of a lot more complicated and interesting than most people even begin to realize. And I decided, you know, about 1991 to come out of the closet, as it were, and speak openly and bluntly about what I've learned. And apparently I've struck a nerve with people because there's been a very favorable response from people as to what I've had to say. And you know, I've been interviewed by Carrie Cassidy about 2 or 3 times, and she's posted the interviews on the net. And she just posted recently an interview I gave her in Laughlin, Nevada here back in February. And in that interview, I bluntly laid out some things I have never, ever really talked about before. And, you know, any of your listeners that want to take a look at some of the things I've been involved with, go to Project Camelot and look at Carrie Cassidy's last interview with me in February. I laid out some pretty blunt and, I think, rather shocking things. But as I said, I'm running out of time. I'm not going to be around that much longer, so I have to share with the people what I've seen, what I've learned, and some of the things I've concluded. And I think it's very important to continue to do that.
I totally agree, and thank you so much for still going strong and still speaking the truth, sir. Why is the government withholding advanced technology and true ancient history and covering up the truth about extraterrestrial visitation? How come they're covering it all up? Well, what do they have in purpose for keeping all this technology from us?
Well, let me be blunt and tell you that we're dealing with the greatest story in human history, and when this whole thing comes out, it's going to change the world. Nothing will ever be the same. I'll give you an example. It's like opening Pandora's box, and I'm sure your listeners are probably familiar with the old Greek story of Pandora. And she had a box filled with furies, and she was advised never to open it. Well, of course, being a young girl, she did, and she popped the lid on the box, and all the furies poured out, and nothing was ever the same. And I think the story of the extraterrestrial presence essentially is about the same thing. You just don't open Pandora's box a little bit. You open it just a crack and boom, everything comes out. And the essential thing is simply this. The human race is a hybrid race. We have been genetically re-engineered by advanced extraterrestrial intelligence. And that engineering, that re-engineering of the human genome really began to take place over 100,000 years ago. And some of those advanced intelligences have been with us from the very beginning, and they're still here. And apparently the evidence that I've seen indicates that they're striving to help the human species endure a transition from adolescence into adulthood. And we're going through some difficult times right now. And as I said, this whole damn thing is dynamite, and when it all begins to come out, nothing will ever be the same.
Yeah. Is there something coming in the future, which is why the government withholds information and conspiring events? What's coming in the near future?
Well, what's coming is what's happening right now, is that the extraterrestrial intelligences and the evidence that I've seen that I trust, the highly classified information, is we are actually dealing with two incredibly advanced extraterrestrial civilizations. And we've had an involvement with them since 1954, when Eisenhower met them at Muroc Air Force Base in California. And the United States and Great Britain particularly have been involved at the very highest levels of secrecy and classification with two incredibly advanced extraterrestrial civilizations. Now, the reality, the fact that one of those cultures had a hand in re-engineering us as a species over 100,000 years ago, and the fact that they're still here, they're still involved with us, and that they are striving to assist us in making this transition. We cannot continue the way we've been. The human race has got to grow up. The human race has got to mature. And for God's sake, we've got to stop waging war against each other on this planet. We can't keep that kind of thing up anymore. The technology that we've come up with over the last 50 to 100 years has made warfare literally obsolescent. We can't continue to wage war against ourselves anymore. That's got to stop. And I'm anticipating that there will be something like a disclosure taking place within the next 5 to 10 years. But it will be done by them. Don't expect poor old Barack Obama to get up in front of a bunch of cameras and say, "Oh boy, have we got news for you." It's not going to happen that way. He's got too damn much on his plate. Bless his heart. I didn't vote for him, but I support him. I hope he continues to, hang in there and do a few decent things and straighten out some of this damn government here. Because we can't continue the way we've been. We can't go on like we've done for the last 1,000 years. We've got to face the reality of who we are, what we are. And the universe we live in is infinite and incredibly filled with intelligent life. And that reality, I believe, and it's one of the reasons I'm doing what I'm doing, that reality, I believe, will bring about an expansion of consciousness in the human race that will hopefully help us survive as a species.
Yeah. Let's see. What type of event do you believe will take place for extraterrestrial and advanced technology disclosure?
Well, they keep showing themselves all over the planet from time to time. They show themselves blatantly. These objects hover over, the one that hovered over Chicago Airport there, for God's sake. And a big one hovered over Allen, Texas, just a few miles from George Bush's home. And They show themselves here and there and everywhere. And we've got photographs of them. All of our Apollo missions over the years photographed them. Every one of the Apollo missions to the moon and back was monitored by them. They flew alongside our guys. They monitored while they were on the moon. They monitored them on the way back. And I have photographs, and I show these pictures, actually, photographs taken by Apollo over the years. And that piece of information is slowly beginning to come out. Now, the government's not releasing it. NASA has not released much of it. But the photographs were taken, and for example, when I make presentations, I show photographs taken by Apollo 13 that I obtained from the Japanese Space Agency, of all places. It appears that back in the 60s, the Japanese Space Agency signed a contract with NASA to buy copies of every photograph NASA took. And NASA, you know, was a big bucks involved. There was a pretty sizable amount of money changed hands. And the Japanese bought copies of every photograph NASA took. Well, somewhere along the way, NASA apparently forgot about this and forgot that the Japanese had copies of all the pictures that they had taken. And, of course, the NASA won't release them themselves, but now the Japanese are in the process of releasing some of them. And I've shown a few of those pictures during my presentations in Barcelona last July. And I'm going to be showing them again I'm going to be showing them again in Madrid and in Pennsylvania at Elizabethtown. And so the world is beginning to, I think, wake up and pay attention. Don't depend on your friendly government to do much about it, but the extraterrestrials have a plan of their own. They have their own agenda. And these are pretty sharp guys. They're concerned about the species here, and they would like to see this human race make a point of surviving. So I believe you're going to see more and more exposure and more demonstrations. And one of these days, and I think it's not too long ahead, what would the average person do if an artificial constructed object, a gigantic ship of some kind, were to hover over New York or Chicago or San Francisco, 40,000 feet up there? What would happen if that object hovered over the city for several days? And you couldn't avoid it. You couldn't ignore it. You couldn't say, oh, it's not there. And everybody's looking up, and what they're looking at is an object, an artificially constructed ship that's 5 miles long. Now, that's going to get some attention. So I have a nagging suspicion that the guys up there may pull off something like that before too long.
Speaking of that, we all hear about like first there was a communism threat, back in the 40s and 50s, and then secondly terrorism, that the government created a terrorism threat. And then many researchers, and I'm assuming yourself too, the next threat is going to be from extraterrestrials. And the government's going to use a top secret technology called Project Bluebeam, if you're familiar with that. Is that possible? Will the government use some kind of advanced technology like Project Bluebeam to stage a fake extraterrestrial threat coming from space?
Well, first of all, I'll tell you that I keep thinking, good God, the government cannot possibly be that damn stupid. But then again, I've said that over the years, and I have to keep reminding myself that in some areas the government is that damn stupid. But I don't believe that they would. I don't believe they would try to pull something like that off, because I don't think the guys from up there the others, as I refer to them, I don't think they would allow it. They brought about the end of the Cold War. They really did. They brought enough pressure on the Soviet Union and the United States that the Cold War literally came to an end. And we're dealing with incredibly advanced intelligence out there. So I don't believe that they would allow our stupid guys in Washington to pull off something like Blue Beam. I don't think they'd ever succeed at it, you know. They played the game along the way with the Cold War and then terrorism. But then again, let's be honest, there is a definite threat from terrorists around the world. But staging a phony extraterrestrial invasion, no, I don't think our guys are quite that dumb. But then again, maybe I could be wrong. I keep overestimating the government's intelligence, and I've done that for years.
Have you heard of the Norway spiral back in I think it was last December?
Oh, yeah, I've seen photographs of it.
Many say that was part of the Project Blue Beam. Tell me a little bit about anything that you have come across or any research that you have done that that may have, or I guess the main thing I'm trying to say, what was the Norway spiral? Was it like some kind of advanced technology that the government or the lead of the world are keeping from the regular public, or what? Or is that Project Blue Beam? What is that?
Well, there's no question about that the government has been keeping technology from its people for so long. It's possible that could have been some kind of a government program. And it's also possible that it could have been a part of that experiment they've been running up in Alaska now for a number of years. They've been messing around with our atmospheric levels, isosphere and stratospheric levels of. They've been messing with weather, frankly, and it could have been a part of that. You know, I don't know, but I don't believe that was an alien. I don't believe that was an alien effort.
How far back has or to your knowledge, how far back has the government known about Earth being visited by extraterrestrials?
Well, the evidence I've seen indicates that it goes back until at least 1941. And the Navy has been the primary service that's been involved with this thing from the very beginning, not the Air Force. The Navy retrieved an extraterrestrial disk that crashed off of San Diego in 1941. So we've been confronted with the reality of their presence since at least 1941. And I think there are some people in levels of government, and I don't know quite what level this is, but there are people in the shadow government that have known about it since the 40s. No question about it. That in 1947 at Roswell, that was not the first event at all. Matter of fact, the Roswell incident was one of 3 incidents that took place all in the course of about 30 days in New Mexico. So we've known about their presence literally since the early 40s.
How about in 1897, whenever I think it was in Aurora, Texas, that there was, I think it was a UFO that crashed in Judge Proctor's property. And was that a UFO or some type of meteor or what?
No, I think it was probably an extraterrestrial ship. I take my hat off to a good friend of mine, the name of Jim Mars. And Jim has been doing a lot of research. He's a journalist who lives in Texas. And Jim has done a thorough research on that 1897 airship involvement, that incident that took place. And I think it took place somewhere around a little town of Aurora in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
In about
it's not
1897. Yeah, so Jim Mars is the guy I refer people to. He's a hell of a top journalist. He's one of the best. And by the way, anybody who's interested, Jim Marrs has got a book out called Alien Agenda. And anybody really wants to really get a hold of the, in one book, pretty much the whole damn story. Jim Marrs covers it in Alien Agenda.
Yeah, I had the book and I've read it a couple of times, and it's very well, I've read it once and I've glimpsed through it a couple of times, just certain chapters, and read up on, just to spark my brain a little bit about some of these events that he writes about. And it's a very fascinating book, and I suggest people that haven't read that book to go out there and read it. It's very fascinating. We had somebody in the chat room that mentioned, how about extraterrestrial visitation for 1,000 years or possibly more? To your knowledge, have you researched anything that has given you evidence to where we have been visited here on Earth for a couple thousand years?
Well, your questionnaire has, your questioner has a good point. I will simply tell you that they're not visitors. They're not visiting, for God's sake. They've been with us from the beginning of our history. And I would refer people who are really interested in this matter to look into the work of Zecharia Sitchin. I know Zecharia. I've met him a number of times. I have a tremendous regard and respect for that man. I believe I think he turned 90 this year, and he's still with us. But Zecharia has written a series of books he calls the Earth Chronicles. And he literally lays out the fact that they have been with us from the beginning of our history. And it goes back a hell of a lot longer than 1,000 years. It goes back literally to the beginning of recorded human history, which is, 3,000 BC or even beyond. Mm-hmm. And so Sitchin's work is probably a monumental piece of work. I'm afraid that, sadly enough, that old Zecharia will really depart this planet long before anybody really grasps the power and the magnitude of his work. The old man deserves a Nobel Prize, for God's sake. But the Earth Chronicles, and it started with his first book many years ago called The 12th Planet. And if people are really interested in the history of the extraterrestrial involvement with the human race, they have to start with the 12th planet. And then read every damn thing Zecharia has researched and written. And then you will get a beginning, at least an opening to the whole story.
How many different types of ETs do you believe have visited Earth in the ancient past, or in the near, or in the present? What type of ETs are they?
Well, when I retired from the military in 1976, we knew of at least 4 that were coming and going and had been here for quite a while. And good Lord, the information I've received and heard from sources I trust over the years, we're dealing with a couple of dozen different groups from different places that are coming and going. And they're not merely interplanetary visitors, nor are they merely interstellar or intergalactic, but some of the more advanced species apparently are slipping in from other dimensions. And you're open a Pandora's box there. You talk about quantum physics being mysterious. When you've got people that are coming from other dimensions, you really opened a Pandora's box. So there are probably literally thousands of advanced extraterrestrial intelligences out there. The universe, apparently, from the evidence we've seen, is literally teeming with intelligent life. And so many of those advanced societies are so far beyond our own that, oh my God, they could be a million years ahead of us. And if we were to encounter some of those, we would probably look upon them as angelic, Our ancestors tended to deify them anyhow.
That's
4,000
exactly what I was
years
about to ask.
before. 4,000 years before Christ, our ancestors, when they encountered them, they literally deified them. And I said this bluntly, and I know I have proof. The evidence is overwhelming that every major religion on this planet has been initiated and orchestrated by advanced extraterrestrial intelligence. Now, if you don't think that is a ticking bomb, my friend, to tell everybody, all the fundamentalists on the planet, that every major religion on the whole planet was initiated and orchestrated by advanced extraterrestrial intelligence. Man, you're dealing with dynamite there. That's one of the reasons why the government has kept the lid on this damn thing for so long.
And also this coming Thursday, I'm going to have Jack Barringer on the show. He's going to be talking about the religion conspiracy, and I'm going to ask him several questions about that also, about the ET involvement, about how the ET has helped shape many religious institutions all around the world, and most of the religions of the world, probably all of them, come to a single source, and they all have pretty much are talking about the same thing. But it's going to be interesting having him on the show. Are you familiar with Jack Barringer?
Listen, I've met Jack. I have a tremendous respect for him. I admire him. He's a scholar. He's done his homework, yeah. And I've read most of the work he's published. And I encourage your followers or your listeners to pay attention. Jack is top notch. He's one of the best.
Yeah. I probably should have asked this towards the beginning of the show when we started talking about ETs and everything. But for those who may not know, Mr. Dean, explain the Brookings Report to us.
Well, that's an interesting study. The Brookings Institute, which is one of our more established and reputable, respected research organizations. I think it's headquartered there in the Washington area somewhere, in Virginia, maybe Maryland. Anyhow, the Brookings Institute was given a contract by Congress, I believe in the late 50s, to do some research. And one of the things they wanted them to look at was what should happen, what should we do if we were to ever encounter advanced extraterrestrial intelligence. And the Brookings Institute took the contract and did the research and spent several years at this thing. They published it, I believe, in late 1960, and they presented their study and report to Congress in 1961. And in the conclusion of that Brookings study, they determined that if indeed we were to ever encounter advanced extraterrestrial intelligence, should we tell the masses of the people? Should the public at large be informed and told about this? And the Brookings study literally concluded that no, probably not. That the study they did indicated that the public, the mass of people, would be so unprepared to deal with the shock of this reality that it would be sociologically, theologically, and psychologically destabilizing, and that they could not handle it. And the Brookings study, published, given to Congress in 61, I believe, literally became national policy at the highest level, at the classified level, and that national policy is still being followed. Now, what they've done in the meantime, that they have initiated and established what I call subliminal education program. And some of the hard noses back there literally call it psychotronic persuasion. No, how to manipulate the public's thinking on an issue. And that program of subliminal education has been underway for many years. So there is a form of disclosure taking place, but it's not like the news conference and the big blunt announcement, which is not going to happen. The public is being persuaded, as it were, subliminally educated, as it were, to grow up and psychologically and subconsciously be prepared to deal with this reality. And that's underway. It's been underway for a number of years. It's taking place continually. But the public's not aware of it.
We have somebody in the chat room that had an interesting point. He said some ufologists and conspiracy theorists have suggested that the Brookings Report conclusions offers a motive for government officials to suppress evidence of extraterrestrial life, should it ever be discovered. And he's right on. He's pretty much saying what you just said also.
Oh, yeah. The Brookings Report concluded that the masses of the people, particularly at that time, were totally unprepared to deal with the reality of advanced extraterrestrial intelligence. The evidence we've had over the years, over the centuries, when advanced human cultures encountered primitive human societies, that it invariably led to the destruction of the inferior society. Mm-hmm. And they thought that would probably happen in the case of advanced extraterrestrial intelligence being dumped on top of the human race. And there's a lot of fact. I think there's a lot of truth there. I believe that the Brookings study probably nailed it right on. And as I said, I think it's become government policy since '61 not to release this information. And some of the pathetic answers that we used to get from the Air Force and the Army and from one group or another, some of the cockamamie answers they used to give to people who stood out in their backyard and looked at a large circular disc hovering over the cow pasture, from weather anomalies to whatever what is it that the scientist said some years ago in Chicago? Swamp gas.
Swamp gas, yeah.
Some of the answers that they've come. What was his name? Old Hynek. He never lived that down. That was sad.
But he eventually came through, though. Towards the end of his career,
Listen, Hynek kept his mouth shut because he worked for the government. He was under contract.
Yeah.
And Alan Hynek had a couple of kids in college. And he wasn't about to endanger the only job he had at the time. So he played along with the government, and he became a mouthpiece for them, and he uttered government pronouncements from time to time. And only after he retired, and after his kids got through college, and he retired and he became an independent retiree, then he came out and bluntly and honestly said some of the things he had learned and some of the things he had concluded over the years.
Yeah. Well, we also have a chat room, or in the chat room, there's a question a while ago when we're talking about the different types of alien races. This guy named Don James, he's asking, did those 4 alien races, from your knowledge, did those alien races in 76 match what was noted in Project Serpo?
Well, I'm not that knowledgeable about Project Serpo. I know that a program of some kind, very much like that, did exist, and it may still exist.
Yeah.
But when I retired in '76, we knew of 4 different groups that were coming and were here. And all 4 of those groups were, well, how can I describe them? They were humanoid. But one of the groups that we knew of in '76 was totally human. Of the 4 we knew of in '76, and I think we've known about a dozen or since. The humanoid type, the arms, legs, head, eyes, But most of them could not walk up and down the street without causing a lot of excitement. They couldn't walk up and down the street in any American city without causing a riot. But the one group that bothered the admirals and the generals the most back in the old days was that this one group was so totally human. They looked so much like us. They could sit next to you in a restaurant or on an airplane or in a theater, and you'd never know. And being paranoid, the military, most of us in the military were trained to be paranoid, for God's sake, is the name of the game. The idea that there could be an advanced intelligence in our midst, walking up and down the corridors of SHAPE headquarters, walking up and down the corridors of the Pentagon, that really disturbed them a lot, and they never quite got used to that. And I think even today there are many of them that have problems with it. But as I said, since '64, we've officially been dealing with two groups, and both of them are not only humanoid, but could literally walk in your presence and you'd never know it.
How come 1947 seems to be a big year? Because I find it very interesting that in 1947, it was the year of Roswell, of course, and then the National Security Act, and then the CIA, which was created also, and then the War Department got changed to Department of Defense. I find that really fascinating that right after the crash in Roswell in July of 1947, that all these things, the National Security Act, the CIA, the War Department to the Defense Department, all that changed right after the crash. Explain that. Well, how come all these things changed right after the crash? Well, were they afraid of something?
Excuse me. My, wasn't that a coincidence? Huh? What an interesting year 1947 was. Oh, my goodness gracious. Yes, it scared the hell out of them, frankly. The military, the masses of the guys in the military, didn't know diddly about this whole subject. They really didn't. They just fought a deadly 4 years war. We barely squeaked by winning the damn thing. I don't know if you've studied your history. I know most of your listeners are a lot younger, and they probably were not alive during those years. But we barely got through World War II. It was a close-run thing, as the British general used to say. And the fact that we defeated the Germans when we did, before they got the nuclear bomb, and they were damn close to it, and the fact that we defeated the Japanese when they did, and they had made some incredible scientific accomplishments themselves. We had been through a 4-year war that was bloody as hell, and as I said, we barely made it. We barely won the damn thing. And the military was not prepared for the blunt evidence that had been presented to them there at Roswell and at the other crashes that took place. As I told you, there were a number of different crashes through about 30 days, not merely Roswell, but other places as well. And I think it was a slap in the face. I think it was a wake-up for them that they were unprepared for. And 1947 was a big year. One of the biggest years, for example, is we not only created the CIA and the National Security Agency, but we signed a pact with the Brits called the UKUSA Pact, UK-USA. And the British, the New Zealanders, the Australians, the Canadians, and the Americans signed this pact, and we've been sharing intelligence information with each other ever since. And 47 was a hell of a year.
I know it seems to be a lot of coincidences right after Roswell, in July. But I'm sure you hear this all the time, and I hear it all the time too. And it's a big question of mine also. When will we be able to travel amongst the stars as the Enterprise did in Star Trek?
Well, you ask a hell of a good question, and there is no quick, easy answer to that. The evidence is that we apparently now do have the ability to travel to the stars. When he retired from the Skunk Works from Lockheed Martin, I think it was in '95, Ben Rich, who ran the Skunk Works there, he took over from Kelly Johnson after Kelly died. And Ben Rich ran the Skunk Works at Lockheed Martin, and when he retired, he made a couple of statements that had a hell of an impact on the people who heard him. But surprisingly enough, they never got into the media. They never got into the press.
Yeah.
But Ben Rich said before he retired, and as he retired in '95, he said, we have science 100 years beyond what establishment scientific understanding happens to be. 100 years beyond. And he said, literally, we can take E.T. home. And that was about the time I think the movie came out, the famous Spielberg movie, E.T.
Yeah.
You may remember seeing it, you know, E.T. wanted to call home,
yeah.
E.T. wanted to go home. Well, Ben Rich says we now have the ability to take E.T. home. And that was a bit of a, you know, a drop in the bucket. I mean, that little remark, the fact that we are 100 years beyond what most people understand. And then I spoke to another retired aerospace engineer some years back, who worked for almost 30 years with, I think, McDonnell Douglas and Boeing. And he told me, and he told an audience of people who were at a conference, he said, we have had a hyperluminal flight for over 30 years. And people, looked at each other and thought, what the hell is he? What's he talking about? What the hell, hyperluminal flight? And he said, yeah, faster than light. We have technology capable of hyperluminal flight. And we've had it for over 30. And these little bits and pieces have come out over the years, and not a lot of people pay attention to it, but we have the technology that, frankly, I think that the technology that we've really got would make what you see on Star Trek look kind of primitive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But no one wants to talk about that, you see, because of national security.
Exactly. And this kind of ties into my next question that I have for you, because it seems like Hollywood keeps making all of these top-budget films about extraterrestrials and visiting other planets out there in the galaxy, but how and why does Hollywood seem to know about highly classified information to help create their movies? What's going on here?
Well, you've asked a good question, and you hit the nail on the head, so to speak. One of the young men in Hollywood, one of the brilliant young directors, Steven Spielberg, I think has been brought into the cover-up from the very beginning. And practically every major movie that Spielberg has made on the extraterrestrial issue has been part of what I have been describing as this program of subliminal education. Close Encounters of the Third Kind was dynamite. E.T. was for the kiddies, but it was also filled with fact. And then Spielberg made a series on television called Taken. And Taken, I think, ran for a number of weeks. I forget how many issues there were. But that was all part of what I call the subliminal education program, and what the hard noses back east call psychotronic persuasion. We're slowly trying to get the people to grasp this reality. And, you know, you have people like Ben Rich, and you have people like, I'm trying to think of the name of the retiree from Boeing. David Froning, that's it. David Froning. David just passed away here this last year. But David spent over 30 years with Boeing and Lockheed Martin and I think McDonnell Douglas. And he's the one that told the audience in Phoenix, in Scottsdale, he said, we've had hyperluminal flight for over 30 years. And this was 15 years ago, for God's sake. And when you've got bits and pieces of this little information dribbling out, you know, the very fact that we literally have 0-point energy, we've had anti-gravity for over 40 years, and that we can take ET home. We've had hyperluminal flight for over 40, 50 years now. I think you look at Star Trek and you're looking at kind of an old-fashioned kind of movie. You know, I think the reality probably makes Star Trek looks like, you know, what is it, the old Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers movies of the late 30s and the 40s?
Yeah.
I think the reality is so far beyond what the average Joe Blow out there has any idea of. And that's one of the reasons I get so angry sometimes. You know, I'm ornery old cuss. Every time I go to the damn filling station and fill up my tank, I get pissed off. Because I know that a whole bunch of guys are making a hell of a lot of money out of the oil business, and we don't need to be pouring oil into our automobiles. And we don't need to be pouring it into the Gulf of Mexico, for God's sake. We don't need to be doing any of that, you see. The science is so far beyond that, but the people are being denied the benefits of that science. Now, when are the people going to wake up and say, to hell with this, you know? I'm fed up with being lied to. Well, it won't happen in my lifetime, but it'll happen in yours, I hope.
Don't say that, Mr. Dane. You never know. You never know what tomorrow might bring, you know?
Well, tomorrow may bring a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but tomorrow is not going to bring a big release of a hell of a lot of information, because they're going to keep dribbling it out to the masses in little bits and pieces, little teaspoons here and a little teaspoon there. And they're going to get you subliminally prepared for this before they really lay it on you. And by the time they really do decide to lay it on you, you're going to be saying to yourself, well, hell, I knew that all along, you know?
Mm-hmm. So how does the future of mankind look in your opinion, and what can we do to help get disclosure on UFOs and extraterrestrials?
Well, listen, if your viewers are interested in tapping into Kerry Cassidy's last interview with me, they'll get some real blunt information about things that I have never before ever really released. And, well, I'll tell you in closing, I think we're running out to the end of the hour here. Yeah, I'm very optimistic about the human race. I'm very optimistic about planet Earth. The human race has a glorious future. We are going to make the transition. We are going to survive. There is going to be a tomorrow, and it's going to be a hell of a lot better than yesterday. And I'm very hopeful and very positive about that. I have a strong, deep feeling, almost in my heart, that there is a future for the human species, that there is a future for planet Earth, and it's going to be a glorious future. And your kids and grandkids and great-grandkids are literally going to go to the stars. When this whole thing comes out, it's going to change the world. Nothing will ever be the same. I give you an example. It's like opening Pandora's box, and I'm sure Your listeners are probably familiar with the old Greek story of Pandora. And she had a box filled with furies, and she was advised never to open it. Well, of course, being a young girl, she did, and she popped the lid on the box, and all the furies poured out, and nothing was ever the same. And I think the story of the extraterrestrial presence essentially is about the same thing. You just don't open Pandora's box a little bit. You open it just a crack, and boom, everything comes out. And the essential thing is simply this. The human race is a hybrid race. We have been genetically re-engineered by advanced extraterrestrial intelligence. Well, I've been at it. I've been speaking publicly for about 20 years now. I've been involved in the phenomenon since 1964. But I've been speaking out openly and publicly since 1991. And I consider this to be the greatest story in human history, and that's why it's got to be told. And it hasn't been told, and I'm fed up with the government lying to its people. And, what time I have left, I'm going to rock the boat and rattle the cage a little bit and try to get people to wake up. Try to get people to wake up and realize that the world that they think they're living in is not at all the world that they've got.
Exactly. So for the people who are just now tuning in, we're talking with Bob Dean. I have his bio linked into the chat room, but if you don't know where the chat room is, or if you aren't into the chat room, go ahead, Bob, and tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you to start speaking the truth about the government secrecy and conspiracy.
Oh, my. You asked me to, I always have a problem when I start talking about this because I never know quite where to begin. And people will say, well, begin at the beginning, damn it, begin at the beginning. And I think, no, I can't do that. If I begin at the beginning, we'll be here till next week. All I can tell you is that I spent 27 years on active duty in the Army. I worked an additional 14 years with FEMA. So I got a 41-year service record in government service. Most of those years I had above top secret clearance, and I had access to and knowledge of incredible information that when I first found out about some of this, it really stunned me. I was shocked myself when I realized that the reality that we live in this world is certainly a hell of a lot more complicated and interesting than most people even begin to realize. And I decided, about 1991 to come out of the closet, as it were, and speak openly and bluntly about what I've learned. And apparently I've struck a nerve with people because there's been a very favorable response from people as to what I've had to say. And I've been interviewed by Carrie Cassidy about 2 or 3 times, and she's posted the interviews on the net. And she just posted recently an interview I gave her in Laughlin, Nevada here back in February. And in that interview, I bluntly laid out some things I have never, ever really talked about before. And, any of your listeners that want to take a look at some of the things I've been involved with, go to Project Camelot and look at Carrie Cassidy's last interview with me in February. I laid out some pretty blunt and, I think, rather shocking things. But as I said, I'm running out of time. I'm not going to be around that much longer, so I have to share with the people what I've seen, what I've learned, and some of the things I've concluded. And I think it's very important to continue to do that.
I totally agree, and thank you so much for still going strong and still speaking the truth, sir. Why is the government withholding advanced technology and true ancient history and covering up the truth about extraterrestrial visitation? How come they're covering it all up? Well, what do they having purpose for keeping all this technology from us?
Well, let me be blunt and tell you that we're dealing with the greatest story in human history, and